All right. I would like to call to order our Academic Achievement Committee meeting. Thank you for everyone for being here this evening. I'm Shayla Adams Stafford, Chair of this committee and District 4 Representative of the Prince George's County Board of Education. If everyone would please introduce themselves, starting with committee members, PGCPS administration staff, and then board office staff. So we can start with Dr. Miller.
Oh, good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Juanita Miller, Chairperson of the board.
Hello, Curtis Valentine, board member.
Hello, Judy White, Chief Academic Officer.
Hello, Doug Strader, Chief Accountability Officer.
Good evening, Anthony Whittington, Director, Monitoring and Accountability.
Good evening, Jamie Bowers, Director of Testing, Research and Evaluation.
And good afternoon, evening. My name is David Reese Jr. from the Office of Equity and Excellence.
Hello, everyone. My name is Valerie Irvin. I'm the board liaison to the CEO.
And I'm Aisha Barkley with the board office.
Thank you. So may I have a motion to approve the May 25th, 2021 agenda meeting? Oops, sorry. Okay. A second. Do I have a second? Can I second it myself?
No, I apologize. I was on mute. Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the agenda is approved. May I have a motion to approve the April 19th, 2021 meeting minutes?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, the minutes are approved. So we have no registered public comment speakers this evening, so we'll move right into our discussion items, and we'll begin with attendance and graduation. Thank you.
So I will turn it over to Jamie Bowers and Anthony Whittington, who will share our information on graduation.
Good evening. So I'm going to share my screen. So we, both Anthony and myself, have updated the presentations from March because there were some new information in the last 2 months. And so we want to let you know that we updated the presentations we're going to share with you this evening. So we're happy to share the updated presentations with you with the updated information on the slides. Everybody see my screen? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. All right, so we wanted to start by building a bit of context for our current graduation rate presentation we're going to talk about, which would be last year's senior class. So some implications that we wanted to discuss that potentially affected some of our graduation rate cohort from school year 20. So there were obviously potential challenges to on-time graduation for some of our students due to some unforeseen implications. So one of those being disrupted instruction. And so we wanted to timeline some of the events that occurred last year. So the instructional days began with March 16th to the 27th, where students were out of school for 2 weeks due to the governor and the superintendent of schools closing all Maryland school systems. And so there was a 2-week gap of instruction over the period of time. Official distance learning began in Prince George's County on March 29th of that year, then continued to the end of the school year in June. However, in between, there was potentially additional instructional time lost. And one of those factors could have been due to technology accessibility, students having access to coursework through a technology device or picking up packets at some point during the pandemic at the beginning at their school. One of the other things we wanted to point out is the quarter 1 through 3 grade average. What could increase by 3 points in quarter 4, and that was based on criteria if a student received a passing grade, but there were no points awarded for an incomplete. And so those are the two options last year for our students in quarter 4. They were either to receive a pass grade or an incomplete grade. One of the other implications could have potentially been our virtual summer school faced some transitional challenges of virtual learning. Those would have been our students who were taking summer courses for credit recovery last summer. So we had some transition changes of going online virtual for those opportunities for our students. Last year, for our graduating class of 2020, there were 2 important graduation waivers that were waived due to COVID. One of those is our testing requirement. That meant participation, passing, and our AV key projects or our bridge projects were all waived for our seniors for last year. The service learning hours were also waived last year. So to put into perspective, we wanted to show you over the last 3 years, including this current year that we're in right now, the 3 different requirements that students need to meet over time. But I want to point out that the one implication here that has not changed is our credit earned. So our students still need to, and have in the past, needs to earn 21 credits to graduate. However, the testing requirements and the service learning hours for the past 2 years have been waived. This past year, the board decided, I believe 2 months ago, to waive those requirements. So the 24 hours was a standing requirement until the board met, I believe in April, to waive that requirement. And so the graduation requirement only consisted of, for our current 2021 seniors, of the 21 course credits.
All right, thank you, Jamie. So I just want to talk briefly about some of the graduation rate summary data. I'll talk about the overall aggregate of the cohort, in addition to some of the student and service group data. So as you know, I was looking at over this 4-year window, 4 or 5-year window from 16 to 20. And the next slide is going to show a few things, but our rate has slightly decreased over the past several years. One reason is because our school system put in place increased accountability measures for certifying graduates. So that could be one of the reasons why our rate has slightly decreased. However, despite the decline in graduation rate, we've seen an increase in the numbers that are inside of our cohort, as well as the number of students receiving diplomas over the past several years, which is a good sign. So this means that our enrollment is increasing within high schools, and we're actually giving more diplomas to students. Next slide, Jamie. So this slide simply represents the 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate over the past 5 years. And what it's taken into consideration is a student over the 4 years of school, then determining if they've graduated within that 4-year span. And so it starts with their first time in 9th grade, and that trajectory walks over 4 years, and then graduation rate is taken. If the child has transferred, that student leaves the denominator for the school. But if the child was withdrawn, that student stays within the denominator. So as you see, our graduation rate increased up to 82.69. And then we saw a slight decrease from 78 to 78 down to 76%. And 76% represents some of the things that Jamie just referenced around things that occurred during the COVID window. And we started instituting more stringent certification of graduates right around in 2018 into 2019. Next slide, Jamie. We wanted you to take a look at the graduation rate as it relates to gender. As you see, it appears that the young ladies are graduating at a higher rate comparison to their male counterparts. From 2016 to 2020, every single year, our young ladies are graduating at a higher rate than our males. And this phenomenon is not just in Prince George's County. This is a national phenomenon. And if I take the data back even to 2010, we'll still see the same thing. Young ladies are outpacing our male counterparts at this particular time. Next slide, Jane. Okay, just a few highlights around student and service groups. Student groups represent ethnicities, and service groups represent groups such as free and reduced meal students, students with special needs that have an IEP, English language learners. So in looking at the data, the African American graduation rate for SY20, the school year that we just ended, was at 84.3%, which outpaced the district average, which is a good thing. However, the Hispanic graduation rate, Hispanics being our second largest student group or ethnicity based on enrollment, fell slightly with a 2% decrease, moving from 64% to 62% graduation rate. As it relates to service groups, our SPED, ARMS, and EL group graduation rate fell below our district rate of 76.2%. And the next slide will just give that in a graphic. We're at 76.17% or 76.2%. That orange line represents our district overall average. And then on the left side, you see our ethnicities, or what we call student groups. And on the right side, you'll see service groups. The N at the bottom represents the number of students that fell within that particular student or service group. For example, where it says Black or African American, N equals 5,768. That is the number of students in the SY20 cohort that fell within the Black or African American student group. Okay, and then lastly, we just wanted to take a quick look at the dropout rate. As it relates to the dropout rate, our district overall dropout rate was 17.8%, representing a 2.1% increase. And 31% of our Hispanic students dropped out of school during this 4-year span. And that represents an increase of 2% for that particular student group. Our English language, 32.6%, and free and reduced meal students, 20.4% dropout rate, was also above the county average. The next two slides simply represent, as a district, our dropout rate over the past 5 years, with 2020 being 17.8%. And the next slide represents this same information, but broken down by gender. And as you notice, the males are dropping out of school at a higher rate than the females. And lastly, the dropout rate for our student and service groups. Next slide, okay. Yep, our student and service groups show. So if you can see, there is an inverse relationship between graduation rate and dropout rate. The lower the dropout rate is, the higher the graduation rate. And the higher the graduation rate is, the lower the dropout rate. They're connected together. Thank you for your time.
Dr. Miller has her hand up. Dr. Miller?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Whittington.
Just 1 second.
Oh.
I wanted to ask, are we finished with the presentation
yes,
now? Are we
yes.
open for questions? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right, got it. I didn't know if we were cutting you off. Sorry.
No.
Go ahead, Dr. Miller.
I just needed clarification. You indicated that when students leave and then when students withdraw, that the system does something for each. Now, when students leave, they're still counted or they're not counted. Just
Correct.
explain that piece to me.
Yes, ma'am. I can definitely do that. The graduation rate is called a 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate. So what happens is when a student enters in the 9th grade, this is deemed their first time 9th grade, and their cohort starts there. So
Okay.
let's say Anthony enrolled as a 9th grader this year for Central High School, my alma mater. Now, the state is going to track Anthony's progress over 4 years. If Anthony continues to remain in the school being educated, in 4 years, the state needs to determine, will I receive a diploma or I did not receive a diploma? If I receive a diploma, that increases that school's graduation rate in 4 years. If I didn't receive a diploma, but I'm continuing to be schooled or move forward, I still don't help the school's graduation rate. However, let's say Anthony was coming to school and then I stopped coming to school. Once I stopped coming to school, the school withdrew me with some type of a W code. There are various W codes or withdrawal codes, but any W code that's attached to a student means the child continues in their denominator, but it doesn't help the school. It's going to bring the graduation rate down because they're a dropout for your school. But if Anthony transferred to another school, then Anthony is removed from that Central High School's cohort, and now I'm attached to the next school that I enrolled upon. When I enrolled in, I become a part of their cohort. So that's why they call it adjusted rate.
I see.
Cohort. Does that make sense, man?
Yes, it does. Thank you. I just didn't I wasn't clear on it.
No, not a problem at all. Thank you for that question. Any other questions?
Yes. So in Board Member Valentine, if you have questions as well, please feel free to jump in here. So just in looking at this data, I'm wondering a couple of things. Could you all share a little bit more about some of the interventions that have been put in place for students prior to the dropout? And then also, if you have any specific scaffolds that have been put in place due to the increased rigor of the graduation certification requirement. So are there special sort of specific programs that speak to that change that happened in 2018? So just interventions and I guess it's sort of the same thing. What interventions have been put in place to stop students? And then if there were, when the graduation certification requirements changed, were there purposeful scaffolds kind of put in place to help students along the way?
Okay, well, I can speak to our system went through a rigorous audit from the state, Maryland State Department of Education in, I want to say 2017, leading into 2018. And one of the parameters that we put in place was around grade changes. So all grade changes used to be held at the schoolhouse level with paper documentation. Now everything is attached to an electronic, we'll call it electronic signature, or any grade change that must occur has to come through a process of approval, starting with the teacher, moving into the administrator, and if it's outside of the window, they have to have an instructional director and even an associate superintendent approve them before grade changes move forward. And our office quarterly reviews grade changes and shares that with the chiefs as well as Dr. Golson. I'm not at liberty to speak to all of the interventions that you're mentioning that are in place at the schoolhouse level. I don't know if Dr. Strader wants to take that or Dr. White.
Yeah, I would just add that, you know, professional school counselors work very diligently looking at the cohort of students. They have benchmarks by which each month they are going through and trying to see who's being certified, are students in the right courses, did students transfer in at the last minute and have what they need for our graduation purposes, even as well as looking at student service hours. I would also say that our school side, and they actually have a lot of interventions in place where they're looking at students, looking at performance, having inquiry cycles, seeing where students are. And they also have programs where students are able to work, which you'll hear us say credit recovery. But ever since we had all of our audit findings, we've been making sure that we've had real tight credit recovery. So a lot of our graduates, we wait until we get into the summer and we provide opportunities for students to regain credits of classes that they fail but could potentially pass. And so they have to go back through those courses. But they have a lot of interventions at each individual school in the area office and how they monitor that.
Mhm.
And I would
I
just
think it-
add-
Oh,
I
I'm
would
sorry.
just
Go ahead,
add-
Dr. Strader.
Yeah, so some of the issues that we experienced that caused the decline in the graduation rates, a lot of what the audit exposed were data quality issues, not so much, the perceived notion from our public of cooking the books and so on. A lot of it was just around data quality, and as well as following the administrative procedures that we had in place. One of the administrative procedures in particular that we had issues and that wasn't followed tightly, then once we did follow it tightly, had a great impact on students, was the administrative procedure on the attendance and the ability for students to pass courses, with
Right.
the cutoff on days absent.
Right.
So the audit had a finding of, hey, you've got a population of kids here that were absent. I forget the total number of days if someone
It's
else.
still passed.
Yeah, and still
Mhm.
passed. So once that kicked in and we put some controls in place actually in school max to cause deference in letter grades, that really triggered, quite a few kids to come into jeopardy. And then we've since lessons learned from that audit, we revised some of those somewhat outdated, right, administrative procedures and modernized them. But, all of that you can see in that decline there, which, caught us in that transition time as a result of that audit. So a lot of the interventions have been put in place. We have some trackers, we have data dashboards that have been produced to be able to monitor some of our performance. A measure that we're putting in place for this upcoming year, it's part of this upcoming year's budget, is a 9th grade cohort tracker, which does follow that cohort of kids through, looking at the different metrics that are required of those students for graduation. Once upon a time, it included the state assessment results, grades, credit counts, attendance, student service learning credits, all of that is kind of built into that. So we'll be releasing that as part of this year's budget, so that activity is ongoing now. So there are some things in place, but I just wanted to give you a little bit more information as far as why you see that decline.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Miller, did you have a question as well?
Oh, yeah, I wanted to know, well, this is, I guess, a demographic that was left, well, how do you include or categorize those students that are homeless that tend to be transient?
Well, I can grab that. So they're part of that cohort. So the schools have to monitor those students and their transactions as they enter and exit schools, right? So as a student, as Anthony shared with you all, schools are required for following and tracking those particular students, whether they're homeless or whatever the case may be. So if a student is absent for 10 consecutive school days, actually less than that, we have administrative procedures in place. So if a student is absent for greater than 3 days, they get a call from the teacher, and that escalates in a number of days, student is out. The 10-day is the automatic trigger, which schools need to move forward with that withdrawal or dropout process for the students. That requires a pupil personnel worker to go out to the parent, out to the home or wherever the past address was for the homeless student. Requires us to do some additional research to try to locate that kid. Across districts, Mr. Whittington can share too, we have processes in place to share student information across our borders to not only the school districts that surround us in Maryland, but also in DC. So if the student leaves our schools and crosses the border into DC, we have a data sharing agreement with them so we can try to find the student over there and transfer the records and the instruction information accordingly. As well as vice versa, if we get kids that show up in our districts, we are obligated to contact the school from which the student is transferring from, right, to make sure we complete the paperwork. So the homeless kids, we have some title monies that are allocated for assisting us in tracking these kids and doing the best we can do to locate them and ensure that their records are following them for wherever they end up.
I remember tracking down and using those papers when I was working in DC. So I do know what you're talking about there. Board Member Valentine, if you want to chime in at any time, just let me know.
Yeah, I'm curious about, and good evening, everyone. The students who do drop out, what are the percentage of students who re-enroll after dropping out after a period of time? Do we have that information?
That's a good question. We can take that back. So what that would look like is students, we can provide that information. So we have withdrawal as well as reentry codes. What I'm just thinking of now is we can provide that information over a cohort, so tracking it over the 4 years. So for instance, at Roosevelt High School, you have 300 incoming ninth graders. And then as their 4-year graduation rate, you can see out of the 300, 200 of them have graduated, 100 of them transferred out, 100 of them transferred in. But what you're specifically interested in is of those that have withdrawn with some type of a dropout code, how many of those have returned to school over that 4-year time? Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I just know, people use dropout rates as an indication for a number of things, and they try to extrapolate that across other areas of our system and try to, highlight areas of improvement, which makes sense. But there are also students who drop out, for one reason or another, and they re-enroll after maybe a semester, a year, or a few years. Now, I would imagine that number is probably negligible. I mean, even at a system as large as ours, even a couple hundred, I don't know if they'll make a huge difference in percentage. I'm just curious whether that's a trend or something that you all are seeing.
So I'm not sure if you would say it's negligible because of the way that we track our data. I mentioned before, if a student's gone for 10 days or more, right, our schools are required by the state to go through a withdrawal process of that student. So let's say, for instance, we have international students that are only here for half the year, then go back. What you're going to see is a regular pattern of those students to be entered into our school system, withdrawn with what we call a W50 or whereabouts unknown. And then the student returns the following season or whatever the case is. So then you see a reentry. So we see a lot of those students actually. So that's why I'm saying I don't think the number is going to be negligible, but we will follow up and provide you with those numbers. But it's going to be important for us to use the cohort model to generate those numbers, because the bulk of our students withdraw or drop out in grade 9 between that grade 9 and 10 school year. That's why, to really address your question adequately, we should look at what happens over the entire cohort of the 4 years. So we'll get back to you on that actual number, but I just wanted to give you some additional feedback of some things that are outside of that normal expectation. A kid drops out, he's just dropping out foreverly. So you'll see that flip-flop within their records.
Would those students who would be categorized as whereabouts unknown, would they contribute to our dropout rate?
Absolutely do, yes. So we are responsible for the kids that walk through our door. We are responsible for their educational program until we can ensure that someone else has picked up the ball for those kids.
And that's my point. I mean, like, again, to the layman, a laywoman, that dropout rate is sort of a fixed thing, right? They're gone, and we just, we visualize them never entering our system again. But, for those in the system, Dr. White, who's been a school leader, I'm not sure if you were high school or not, but we do have a number of students, international students, who, in many cases, that the month of December and January will go off and then re-enroll. These are stories I hear in my own household, particularly at Largo High School, where you do have a large international population, and that was something that was common. I don't unenroll them early December. It's a very large period of travel back to the continent of Africa during Christmas time, and then re-enroll. I just didn't know that it count as a dropout. But I say when people think that and they're judging the board, the superintendent, the system, that they're not kind of the backstory. And so I appreciate that. The other question I had, and this is a figure that under Dr. Maxwell was touted And this is the percentage of students who need remediation at the community college at Prince George's, and that number had gone down. Are you all tracking that? 'Cause I think that's also an important number. You think about graduation rates, and again, for those who extrapolate a lot about graduation rates being an indication of college and career readiness, and in many ways it's not. Is there do you all have that number of students who had to be remediated at the community college?
One of our,
Go ahead, Dr. White.
I was just gonna say, one of our offices under student services that works directly with our community college, our students have to pass certain criteria to even take classes at the community college, and they work in tandem with them, especially around our mathematics and our, well, math is the biggest one, to determine where kids are falling, what they're achieving on that data. So I'm sure that she could grab that data.
And I imagine there'd be two cohorts, right? So there's those who are taking dual enrollment. So you're talking your 10 through 12, which depending on what you're taking, if you're still in our system, technically that remediation to me wouldn't be as big an issue as opposed to those who have graduated, sort of crossed the stage. We've said that they're, alums of our system and then walked into the community college and then still do remediation. So
Yeah. And we would have to ask the college if once they've left us, if they're tracking where students are coming from entering in. I know for our dual enrollment and even some of our concurrent enrollment students that are still with us, more than likely we can grab that data, but I'm not sure we track once a student has graduated, because that would be based on what the universities collect for students coming in.
I mean, that number was something I know that the Maxwell administration touted. So I'm assuming they were getting, I think, from Dr. Dukes. But I mean, just another number that I think we could hold on to. But again, I appreciate this conversation. Thank you, Chairwoman Adam Staff, for having this conversation. This is graduation season.
Yeah, I had two pieces to that. One of the pieces that Dr. Maxwell put in place, actually, it was what was going on at the State Department at the time. That was during the college and career readiness movement, of which state law came out requiring us to actually track college and career readiness for all of our students. So we have measures in place to be able to identify college and career readiness within our students. State assessment programs, there was a college and career ready benchmark there, and ELA in math. We also have the SAT. We had benchmarks there. We are required to assess all of our high school students, all of them, at least once on college and career readiness. If they get through college and career readiness by 11th grade, fine. If they're not, it requires us to kick in some other additional supports for those students. So on our side, when we had the state assessment programs, prior to COVID and so forth, we were able to track that for all of our students. Now that the state assessment program, we haven't assessed our kids in the last 2 years, that's a bit more problematic. But I think you will see some of those numbers, once we get up and active again with those assessments. That data we own. What you're talking about here is trying to get data from our community colleges back to us on what's going on with our kids. That is usually a bit more problematic, to get that type of information. But what you're asking is definitely a worthy metric to track.
Yeah, I hope we can work together as partners. I mean, we, community colleges in the system are not like totally out of touch like an out-of-state school or a private school would be, private college. So I hope we can work together on this. This is the one thing I think I'll say before I turn it back over. When we looked at this years ago, we understood that sort of the 9th grade reading and math scores were a lag indicator for graduation, and that was something we really wanted to concentrate on as we sort of move the conversation towards solution. Just wanted to, Dr. White, get a feel for, is that 9th grade math reading still a lag indicator? If students who do not pass reading and math in 9th grade, are their chances of graduating in 4 years diminished as it was in the past?
Yeah, I would say that, as we put measures in place, then we hit the pandemic. So I think once we come out of the pandemic, we've tried to put in a lot of supports for students to be able to regain. So for example, you could have had a student who might not have done well based on circumstances of what they're going through right now, but we're trying to get them caught up. And then by the time they get to 10th grade, we wrap our arms around them, which that 9th grade tracker that Dr. Schrader referred to will allow us to see who those kids are and to put those extra measures in place to try to bring them back on track so that they're getting the support, they're getting the social, emotional just some different components that I think will help address them. You know, in the past, I think we spent a lot of time really focused in on just content. And I think what the pandemic has allowed us to see is we got to make sure we have a lot of wraparound skills also, and supports for students to help them get back on track if they've gotten off, to try to push them towards graduation. So we always say ninth grade tracking data for a purpose, and it's exactly what you're talking about, because we know that that's the year that either we're going to make or break a student, right? And so that's the year where we got to try to say what happened, how can we support you, how can we support the family, how can we, you know, not worry that that happened, but get them right back on track and try to get them caught up with their cohort. And we're trying to work to put other measures in place to make sure students have those opportunities to catch up and to be supported.
Thank you. I had just a quick question about what Dr. White just mentioned. Do we have any programs for ninth grade students that double up on math and ELA? I know that that's been a struggle. Okay.
We do. So a lot of
Okay.
times we see our students and they start tracking that data from a student in 8th grade. So you
Okay.
might identify from their 8th grade data and the articulation that would go from a middle school across to a high school, that a student might not only need Algebra 1, but they need Algebra 1 lab. So you try to back them up 2
Okay.
classes back to back. In same way, you identify students that are struggling with English. So you want to give them English now, but you're going to give them a back-to-back lab. With. And then, you know, for a lot of our ESOL students, depending on where they come in, they have opportunities to take a different math and a different English until we feel ready that their academic language is enough for them to be successful in our regular courses.
Thank you. So my question actually, Board Member Valentine, and I think I saw Board Member Jackson come in and she may have left back out, but I was going to ask about the predictors for student tendency to drop out. And I wanted to know, just the numbers for me are startling around Latino male students specifically. And I wanted to see if, you know, there had been plans or if this has already happened, or if this is something you're interested in doing, but pulling together maybe some focus groups of students to sort of get at, you know, what are some of the outside factors or cultural factors that are, you know, impacting this rate? Where are there some bright spots where we have Latino male achievement, where Latino male students are graduating at very high rates, and what can we do to replicate that? And I think that as we think about models of culturally responsive teaching and learning where boys of color are thriving, you know, have we, or are we interested in looking at possibly HBCUs and HSIs, you know, as models for how to really usher in and support those male students? Oh, you're on mute.
$1.
$1.
I know that we have many programs in our district. Board Member Valentine is a huge sponsor of making sure that our males have male figures and opportunities. With doing a lot of partnerships with, you know, different universities at Howard. But I can definitely, that's one of the things that we can look at and see specifically, especially around our Latino males, like where are the pockets of excellence in terms of, you know, we know that our international high schools do well and they follow a different model, but where else are those pockets of excellence and what does it look like? So it's definitely something we can go back as we're trending and looking through data just to kind of comb through it a little bit more.
Absolutely.
I think your idea of a student focus group is also valid, because I know last year Bladensburg High School did a focus group with some of their students who took the access test and found that their lowest performing subgroups on that test were speaking and listening. And so they want to hear from students, what other opportunities can we offer to you to help strengthen your speaking and listening? And a lot of the students said offering more opportunities of language that they would go use to further a career or a job. And we get a lot of valid data from doing those student focus groups. So I think that that's probably something that we should look into with some of our more specialized populations to get that kind of feedback.
Awesome.
And board member Adam Stafford, for the past several years, we did have something called an early warning indicator report. I don't know if board member
I've heard of those,
Valentine, you had that for several years. And what it would do is really predict or look at a promotion probability and give every student 7th, 8th, and 9th grade a percentage of being promoted when they enter ninth grade, because all of our data from Prince George's County suggests if a ninth grader moves from ninth to 10th successfully, 86% go on to graduate. But if they are retained in ninth grade, only 24% went on to graduate in 4 years. And many didn't go on to graduate at all. So moving from ninth grade successfully into 10th grade is a huge factor for the success of our graduation rate. And we looked at the factors in a bunch of formulas, their grades, their attendance, how well they're able to read, and how many times they've been suspended. And then we will update that promotion probability every quarter. So COVID kind of put a spin on that, because then we couldn't use correct factors because we didn't have enough data, but we're trying to move into that space for SY22 again to give promotion probability for those incoming students into 9th, 8th, and 7th.
And you know, tell me if this is already happening, but I know that in districts, a ninth grade academy, is that something that we have happening here? But there's funding specifically for a ninth grade academy at a school in which those students would move as a cohort. They would do college tours together, after school programs together. They had like competitions, this sort of sense of belonging, that sense of belonging that you know, engender when you're part of that team. And, you know, perhaps, you know, some of the, you know, funding that we're getting from ARP, which I know is focused on helping students, particularly low-income students, could be used to support those ninth grade academy in some of our hotspot schools where, you know, those programs, I've seen them have great success.
Yes, ma'am. And Dr. Miller, to your point, the service groups that we showed, we only showed the service groups with the largest number of students, but there are other service groups like you mentioned. I think you mentioned homeless. There were 132 homeless students in the cohort for SY20 with a graduation rate of 29.5%. But the state also tracks foster care, military connections, Title I students, ADA, 504 students as well. They are service group designations too, but the numbers are really low. So that's why we only showed the largest 3 for our district. I turn it back over to Jamie.
I was going to say, Anthony, thank you for that early warning. And that's sort of the point I was making with Dr. White about the 8th and 9th grade. I mean, reading and math in 9th grade. I mean, that early warning was a lag indicator of what the graduation rate would be 3 years later. I will say it's ironic we're talking about, Latino male cohort. You know, we made history. The next student member of the board is going to be a Latino male, and so that's something. It's about timing. But if that's his interest, I think that could be an area for his leadership.
I think I see him watching right now.
He's attending. I was going to say that he's attending.
Congratulations! If
Congratulations.
I'm the only Black person where I work, so I know what it's like. People say, "Hey, man, you do this because you're in a group." I don't want to put that on you, bruh. But if that's something you're interested in doing, I know I would. And Shay, I call you Dr. Adam Stafford. Maybe that's coming too. We'll be interested in doing.
I received that.
You receive it. Hey, receive it. Let me talk to your husband about it, because my wife has a doctorate. It ain't easy on the spouse though. But to that point, this is what I wanted to bring up, and this is sort of a good transition. And this is again how we bring everything that we have to bear. So I'm gonna ask you a question, Dr. White. It's gonna sound kind of weird. What was your dissertation topic, Dr. White?
I focused on educational leaders and their beliefs, and did their beliefs actually impact the work that they did in their buildings?
I asked that because right now everybody's talking about all these graduates. Everybody got doctorates, not everybody, but a lot of doctors going around. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to my wife. I said, Daria, how many times people ask you what your dissertation was about? Mm-hmm. She says, not very often. Everybody want to like the pictures and comment, but all that research you put into it often goes on the shelf.
Yeah.
There are people right now who are getting doctorates right now in our school system. They're researching, they're in the schools, they're talking to students. I see soon to be Dr. Bowers and everybody. And I'm saying, there's somebody right now studying graduation rates of Latino male students in Prince George's County. And are we leveraging this expertise from BOE State, Howard University, Morgan State, University of Maryland College? I spoke to a cohort of doctoral students, and soon to be Dr. Bowers was on that call Saturday morning. And it's just, to me, we have these conversations, But there are questions that I have, and one in particular around certain subgroups. So our West African students, particularly when it comes to Val Sal, outperform, I believe, their demographic in a lot of ways. And I wrote an article about this years ago. And I said, how can we get certain parent groups who do well in the same school that other students aren't doing well? There's something that they're doing when they go into the building, something they're saying to their kids, somehow they're advocating that puts them in a position that a lot of students are not in. And so there's ways to converse amongst groups, to bring together a working group, whatever you want to call it, to say, our system works well for a lot of students, and our system does not work well for a lot of students. And it's sort of like never the two shall meet. Like, how can this group, we got students going to Harvard, Yale, Morehouse, Bellman, Howard, you want to call it, and we got students dropping out in 9th grade in the same school. And, it's oftentimes when we have these research opportunities, and I know we have Dr. Eubanks is over at University of Maryland now working within the doctoral program. How can we bring some of these doctoral students to the table, to our meetings, soon to be Dr. Adam Stafford, and say, hey, you've been doing this for 3 years. You didn't work in, I got a friend of mine who's doing a doctorate right now. He's working in 4 of our schools right now. And I'm like, so what happens when you finish your dissertation? What do you all work? He's working on middle school math scores for boys in Prince County. Is anyone going to read that? Like, that's important to me. I want to be able to bring all this, together, and we could do that as a committee, but also as a system.
Board Member Valentine, I'm like, I don't have any emojis on here to like clap or snap, but I'm hearing everything you're saying. It's so funny, as I look at the national landscape, I really truly think that here in Prince George's County, we really are leaders in working with young males of color and helping them feel that sense of identity and affirmation. That's what everybody in America is trying to figure out right now. How do we engage young males of color? And so I really do think that Dr. White and her amazing team, if this team came up with a framework for social emotional learning that was culturally affirming, that's gold right there. That's a PGCPS branded framework of cultural affirmation, and how do we like remember Valentine is saying, we have students, male students of color here in this district that are achieving at high heights, and so many people around the country are trying to figure out how to do that. And so us developing our own framework and testing it in our own schools, leveraging the brain power that we have right here in our own system and network, I really do think that we could create something that could be like game changing for real. So definitely, I think next year we need to have some featured guest speakers and maybe possibly go deeper with this concept of, graduation rate specifically for males and males of color, to kind of pull together some of these great minds to think about where is this working well and what are they doing? I just think about Flowers High School. Of course, I'm biased, it's in my district. But like you said, they're cranking out these young men who are going, they're going all over Duke, Harvard. I mean, they're everywhere. And what they're doing there, establishing that sense of identity, establishing that we go together far, we go far together. That kind of concept, I think, is gold. So I hope that we can bring those thoughts together. Now we have to move on. I am so sorry, everybody. I just get so interested and passionate about what we're talking about, and we have 2 other things to discuss as well. So I want to move from here, if that's all right with everyone, to our next item, which is testing accountability for school report cards, and then we'll move to our last item, which is equity.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with the presentation. So just some things we want to highlight before we talk about the actual accountability framework within the state and our district. So for the last 2 years, you can see when you go to the Maryland School Public Report Card site that due to the pandemic, report card results were actually put on hold for last school year and this school year. And we're going to talk about why that was done and some of the implications for that to occur, as well as some things that we are still looking at as a district, even though the state is not collecting those and using those to come up with a point value or stars for our schools. So a few things of note for this current year. So MSDE in April submitted a waiver request to the U.S. Department of Ed based on a few things. So one of the things that they wanted to have in their waiver request was for accountability measures. And so some of the things that they targeted in their waiver request for this school year that we're currently in is continuing with the no star rating. So because we did not have a state assessment administered this year, and because we could not track growth of our students in that state assessment for reading and math, that eliminated about 50% of our points that would have been used to calculate a star rating or point values for schools. Another indicator that they want to put on pause in that waiver is identification of any newly identified CSI and TSI schools for fall of 2021. So currently we have 2 CSI high schools, and we have over 80 of our elementary, middle, and or high schools are identified as TSI schools. And so the waiver request would actually put a pause on that and not allow us to, or the state to, identify any new schools that would fall into those 2 categories for next year. The third most important waiver, I believe, is not to administer our science assessment to our students in grades 5, 8, and high school next fall. So as we sit right now, our students, and we'll get to this in the second bullet point, our students in Prince George's County will be taking a fall administration of our MCAP reading and math. And currently they're also slated to take a science MCAP assessment in grades 5, 8, and high school. And that would occur within the first few months of school. The logistics have not been worked out, nor has the timeline been worked out for when that's going to be. However, that would put 3 different assessment administrations on our students in the fall. And so that waiver is asking USED to waive the 3rd assessment, which would be that science assessment. MSDE with that waiver would also still be able to do the following. They'd be able to shift those long-term goals that have been identified for our annual targets, our AMOs, for schools by 1 year. And so in ESSA, we had a window of time in which MSDE set long-term annual goals, formerly known as our AMO targets. So that would allow districts to shift those and MSD to shift those by 1 year. And we will also be administering a fall and spring 2021 English language arts and mathematics assessments to our students in grades 3 through 8 and grade 10 for high school. And that would be language arts. And for mathematics, it would be students in grades 3 through 8. And then our students who took Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. So those assessment administrations would occur in the fall as well as in the spring. And so MSD has not received a request for more information, nor have they received, to my knowledge as of today during the board meeting, a response on that waiver. So for this current school year, we did not administer any of our state assessments. That included our access, our MCAP for reading and math, our or science, our alternative assessments in science, our high school government assessments in for our high school students. This was supposed to be the first year we administered as a field test our social studies assessment in grade 8. That was also not administered. Our alternative assessments for English, language arts, and math, nor our Maryland school survey. So you can see some districts did opt to administer 1 or 2 of those assessments. However, Prince George's County did not administer any of those state assessments this current school year. So when we're looking at in a regular school year, have an elementary, a middle school, and a high school report card. So we wanted to show you the breakdown and what I was speaking about earlier. If you look at the blue box at the top and the green box right underneath of that. So if you look at our state assessments in reading and math, In elementary school, that is comprised of 45 points out of the 100. So you can see off the top that schools would be at a detriment and not administering those reading and math assessments, nor being able to show growth. So if you look further down, we have credit for a well-rounded curriculum, which Anthony is going to talk about in a few slides in more depth, which is 10 points. We have our progress in achieving English language proficiency, which is our access assessment, that is 10 points. We have our chronic absenteeism rate for our district and schools, that's 15 points. We have our Maryland School Survey, which is worth 10 points. And we have access to well-rounded curriculum, which is 10 points. So that rounds out the total of 100 points for our elementary report card. So in lieu of the state not calculating a report card score or stars this school year, we still do collect several of these indicators in light of the fact that the state is not. And so some of those indicators are credit for completion of well-rounded curriculum, which Anthony will talk about in a few slides of what makes up that well-rounded curriculum. Our access test, while we did not give it this past school year, we did have results from last school year that we actually used to make some instructional decisions for this current year we're in. We still continue to collect chronic absenteeism rates for our students who are chronically absent in their buildings, and then the access for completion of well-rounded curriculum. So much like our elementary school report card, the middle school report card looks very much the same. Some of the point differentials are within the well-rounded curriculum. You can see there's an addition of our science and our social studies assessments for middle school students. However, all of the other point structures, the access, the chronic absenteeism, the school survey, and the access to well-rounded curriculum stay the same. For our high school, the report card looks a little bit different. So our academic achievement on our MCAP reading and math is now 30 points because we're unable to track growth in the same way as we are in elementary and middle school because of the different course taking structures that are in high school. So they give more point value to the actual overall academic achievement results in high school for reading and math. They also have a 15-point differential for high school graduation rate on their report card. They still have 10 points for the access assessment. In high school, they have 5 points for the on-track in 9th grade, as well as 5 points for completion of well-rounded curriculum. And then the chronic absenteeism, the school survey, and the access are still the same point differentials as were in the elementary and middle school report card. So you see in that bulleted list, while the state is still not collecting some of these measures, those things that we've highlighted in that bulleted list are things that Prince George's County is still continuing to collect and track for our own accountability measures.
All right, so I'll be brief to make sure Dr. Reese has time. Jamie referenced many of the points there, and I'll touch on it. Go back for a second, sir. So what I want to take into consideration is this is a sample of what every school receives, and you can, on mdreportcard.org, you can pull up any school within the state of Maryland's accountability report card for SY 18-19 school year, because they haven't done it in the past 2 years. If you look at the top right, you see stars here, kind of like going to a fine restaurant, 1 star versus a 5-star. So this school in this example has a 4-star rating, and right below it, it says the percentile ranking. Because this is an elementary school, it says 74 percentile. What that number is referencing is the comparison of this school's total possible points earned at the bottom, 68%, to all of the other elementary schools in the state of Maryland. So it gives a good indication of how this school and the students are performing on all of the indicators as it relates to every elementary school in the state of Maryland, not just Prince George's County schools. So that 74% is a very high rating for this particular sample elementary school. In addition, you see on the left-hand side, we have indicators, academic achievement, academic progress, progress for achievement in EL proficiency and school quality, which are then broken into possible points, which is there are 20 possible points in the academic achievement indicator, and this school received 14 of the possible 20 points. Moving along the line, you see a check there for annual progress, which used to be called an annual measurable objective, or the percent which the state would like you to be. And that percentage continues to escalate or move forward. And then you get a check if you're showing some type of improvement within this particular indicator. Next slide. All right, now elementary and middle school primarily have an identical report card as it relates to indicators. Left-hand side indicator, academic achievement, academic progress, English language proficiency, and school quality. These indicators are broken into accountability measures. So the first one, academic achievement, the performance composite on English language assessment, and the performance composite on the math assessment. Worth 10% of the total pie or the total possible points. So 10, 10, and you just add up all of the points to get to your total possible points in the end, and those are divided against the numerator. And on the right-hand side, it just shows the instrument to which the state is using to actually calculate those points. I'm going to talk a little bit about high school next. So the next one Jamie will show will be middle, which is similar, but high school. Whereas elementary and middle, they're looking at the students that are currently inside of the building, starting with third grade, and how they did on these various assessments and these other indicators. High school is looked upon a little differently when you calculate their report card. For many of these indicators, high school is looking at the exiting students of that year, or the students that are graduating within that year, and then backtracking 4 years to determine many of the indicators here. So the English language arts, the academic achievement is attached to exiting students. The graduation rate lags a year, but it's attached to exiting students for a year prior. English language proficiency is attached to current students that are in the building because you need 2 assessments back to back. On track for 9th grade is attached to current 9th graders, but credit for well-rounded and opportunity for well-rounded are attached to the exiting students looking back over their 4 years of cohort work. Next slide. Before I talk about credit, I'm going to talk about, you had an indicator that was there for all elementary, middle, and high school called chronic absenteeism. Chronic absenteeism is attached to the entire building of students, and it represents any student that has missed 10% or more of their membership days fall into a chronic absenteeism status. But that number continues to move based on the number of membership days. For example, if Anthony could be at 13% chronically absent in November because I've missed 13% of my membership days. But if I start coming to school more, my 13% moves down to 12, to 11, and 10. And in March, I would be out of the 10% or more window, and then I'm not deemed chronically absent. So that number is a constant moving focus. Last 2 things I want to talk about is credit and access. Credit simply represents passing. Think when you see credit, means they pass. So for elementary 5th grade students, passing one of each of these courses, their social studies, fine arts, physical education, and health. If I have a passing grade A, B, C, or D in all 4 of these areas, the school gets a win or a point on the state report card. Middle school, same, but they're looking at their core content areas: mathematics, English, science, and social studies. Remember, passing means A, B, C, or D for their final grade. And last, for high school credit, they're looking at you passing one of the assessments that are listed here, which is deemed or making you college and career ready which Board Member Valentine, I think he alluded to earlier. So during my 4 years of school, was I able to get a 3 or higher on an AP exam, a 4 or higher on an IB exam? Was I able to be dually enrolled, meaning I'm taking college classes while I was in high school? Was I able to get a 31 or higher on the ASVAB or the Armed Services exam? Do I have a seal of biliteracy? These are things, if students can show mastery in one of these areas, a SAT score of a 480 and an English score of a 520, 530. If I can show one of these, the school gets credit on a state report card for credit for well-rounded. Whereas access, next slide, is think of the word access and enrollment. Are the students enrolled as fifth graders in all of these courses? If they're a fifth grader in our school district, they should be enrolled in science, social studies, fine arts, physical education, and health. For eighth grade, they must be enrolled in fine arts, physical education, health, and computational learning, which was added in SY19. They must be enrolled in all of those courses for the school to get credit for that student. And lastly, for high school, this looking over the 4-year span, was the student ever enrolled in an AP or IB course? Did the student participate, meaning enrollment, in a dual program? Or did they complete a CTE concentration program? And I think that's the last slide, Jamie.
It is.
It is. Okay, great. So then questions on it? I know we moved kind of swiftly through that, but we just wanted to give you a quick overview of the Maryland Accountability Framework and the state report card that schools receive regularly, but we haven't received a report card for the past 2 years.
Thank you so much. I was wondering about the seal of biliteracy. Can you talk a little bit more about how that's attained?
Right. The seal, in order to receive a seal of biliteracy, a student must prove to be able to read, write, speak, and listen in a second language fluently. I don't know if I'm saying that
do we have a high
100% right, Dr. White, but
You are,
that's
and they have to pass our English. They have to be proficient in English as well.
right. So that second
We
language.
do have a high, we have, I think we're trending in the state higher than a lot
Nice.
of districts in the state. We can grab those numbers for you. Our immersion programs help us, as well as our world language. We have a lot of students in just our regular comprehensive world language courses that are passing as well.
And my next question was about the science course. If I remember correctly from your presentation, you said students offering a science course added an extra point to the school's report card for students being enrolled in a science course?
It depends. Enrolled in all of those courses that I listed earlier, you would have to be enrolled in all of those courses.
I don't know why I thought on that individual school one, there was an extra point added for science. In the school one? Okay, maybe that I read that wrong. Because I was wondering, I know that there's a school in our district that requires all students, it's middle school, Thomas Johnson Middle School requires all students to take a STEM class. And I thought that was unique, and I didn't know if other schools had that requirement and if that could be something that could help support getting more points generally and overall for our middle schools.
Thomas Johnson and Oxon Hill Middle School are 2 STEM middle schools. And they're all of our middle school students have to be exposed to a computational learning. Those 2 schools, so while we have a computational learning course, those 2 schools are able to use their STEM curriculum because they're STEM focused schools. It also counts as that computational learning. So you'll see most of the time they'll have 100% because they are a STEM school. But somewhere in their middle school trajectory, all of our students have to have somewhere in that middle school experience of computational learning.
Do we have any plans to expand that designation of being a STEM school? You know, just thinking about sort of, you know, the demands of industry right now and that great opportunity to get that exposure in middle school. Do we have any thoughts on it, you know, having more schools have that STEM designation?
Yeah, it's something that we've been talking about, or and if not that, how do we expose our students to different STEM opportunities at those younger ages? Our STEM supervisor does well with a lot of competitions for all of our students, even
Yeah.
taking down to elementary. And if we were to expand, I know one school right now that has been begging to be a STEM middle school. So, but it is something that we're looking at. With budgets, we always have to look at what does it cost to build out, and what staff would you need, and all of those things. But it is something that we're evaluating.
Awesome.
I had one question, particularly around the assessments that we won't be doing. How will this impact our ability to assess and diagnose, particularly areas for student achievement? I mean, student improvement. Are there other sort of apps or technology we're using, particularly for teachers and some parents, to be able to use to assess where their students are and how we can help them?
Yeah, so we have a lot of our digital platforms that allow us to see where students are. I think you heard soon to be Dr. Bauer say that when students come back in the fall, there will be many assessments, some that MSDE is asking us to provide to students that will quickly give us where they are. We've also have some other district data that will allow us to see where our kids are, where the interrupted disruption happened, and how we are able to fill some of those gaps as we move forward.
Thank you.
All right. If there are no further questions here, we want to move on to our next discussion item, which is equity.
Right before he starts,
Okay.
I have a quick question. Soon to be Dr. Bowers and Mr. Whitting, if you guys can send over those presentations, email those to me so we can post those. Thank you.
Sure.
Floor is yours, Mr. Reed.
Thank you very much. If you just give me one moment to make sure I am in fact sharing the correct screen, because I am now using multiple screens. Just by way of introduction, my name is David Reese, and I am honored to be here in the Office of Equity and Excellence in the Prince George's County Public School System. Can you all see the opening slide at this? Actually, that's not the slide I wanted at this point in time.
Yes.
Yes, you can. Awesome sauce. All right, so I am going to kind of jump right in. But for those people who know me, I really don't like presentations because they make me feel restricted and constrained. So the slides will be my guide as I kind of walk you through some things I wanted to discuss with you all this afternoon. And I'm a cat dad, so Indigo pops up whenever she feels like it. A year ago today, George Floyd was murdered. And the CEO of our school district, Dr. Monica Goldson, and her executive leadership team knew that something had to happen pretty quickly for the system to begin addressing the conditions that were at play in the nation and some of the things that were troubling the hearts and minds of our community members in Prince George's County. Soon thereafter, on the 11th of June, 2020, during the middle of the pandemic, I was charged with putting PD together to help the system think about bias, implicit bias, and sometimes explicit bias. But because of my work in equity, I knew I felt pretty strongly that we had to take a step back before we could talk about equities and inequities and what creates the racism that we see. And I pulled back so that the system could do some focus on the topic of identity. And I want to quickly share what the activity looked like that the staff saw on June 11th, where we centered identity. And I was able to facilitate a conversation where I asked people to write your name in the middle of the circle, and we got to say whatever it was that we chose. And I think I referred to myself as Junebug because that is a childhood name that I was given, and I told them my name was David. I was able to speak about things that I hadn't said out loud before in front of people, and it was cathartic. I got to talk about being the 23rd grandchild of my grandmother from Alabama, and she has 40-something grandchildren, and I was the first to graduate from high school. I got to talk about being a teacher. I taught at the Early College High School in Durham, North Carolina, and there's a picture of me when I was Teacher of the Year. Teaching at that high school is one of my proudest moments. I could have chosen to speak about my religious upbringing as an evangelical Lutheran, and if I wanted to, I could have talked about my gender identity, sexual orientation, age, or other aspects of my identity that were important to me. As we continued in that activity, we got to the hard part where people got to share out with their groups. And we asked the leadership team to model for the entire system a story about a time when you were proud to identify with one of those identities. And we asked them to share a story about a time when it was painful to be associated with one of those descriptors. And then we had a conversation about stereotypes. So because I'm a teacher, and I don't necessarily do things in a conventional way, I want to open up the floor for a moment, just for a brief moment, to get some feedback from you all. I want to ask a question, particularly to our school board members. What might the impact of an activity like this be on a school district if everybody does it across scale? And I'll open the floor to hear a couple comments from you all.
I was going to go first because I have to drop off, but I do appreciate this conversation and where it could go. I think it's just opportunity to really understand how we are all interconnected and how we can support one another, but also just each of our individual contributions as a part of the whole and what we as a district can be when we come together. I'm just so excited about this board and this system because I just know the potential. Once we appreciate everyone's unique contribution, but also more importantly, their ability to bring their full selves to the work. And so I think, David, you mentioned all the different aspects of who we are, and a lot of us don't bring it to the table for different reasons. But I kind of equate it to a car. It's like, having a Ferrari, but only driving it in first speed.
Yes, sir.
We have all those things. And I tell some of my students at University of Maryland College Park, if you just brought everything you were to this course, and we all did, how beautiful it would be. Now the question is why you don't, and that's I think what you're talking about. So how do we sort of give people the space? And I think I brought up to Miss Bowers and her group this weekend at the University of Maryland. I spoke with them, which is how do we create an enabling environment for others to feel comfortable to be their full selves, and some of it's on them to move into that space. But I think also as we look in the mirror, we say, how can Curtis Valentine, how can I make the space open for everyone else to feel comfortable being their full self? And so I think that's an important conversation. I do have to drop off, but I definitely look forward to hearing more about this in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for your participation. And is there anyone else who wanted to say a few words about the impact that you could foresee?
Yeah, I think the intersectionality of our identities really influences how we show up every day. And for school leaders, that determines policy, that determines how you interact with students and families. And this is such important work. It's so important for people to hold the mirror up to themselves, to know yourself and know your students. So I'm so grateful for you, Mr. Reese, for doing this work. With our teachers. This is a core part of culturally responsive teaching and learning. This is awesome.
Absolutely. And if at any moment in time, other colleagues want to jump in and say something, feel free to do so, but I know we'll have some Q&A at the end. So we heard two big I words. One was interconnectedness, and the other was intersectionality of our identities. I was pleased to hear our colleagues earlier from the Division of Accountability talk a lot about testing, about data, about graduation, and all of the factors that are important to a school district. Well, underneath each of those data points is a whole student who, in order to show up in the data and be their best, they have to be comfortable bringing their entire self to the school where they are affirmed, where they know that the adults care about them, and the adults have to know that the adults care about the other adults in the building too. And not having to hide aspects of who we are is central to that. So that said, I have two essential outcomes for today. I want to briefly talk about the work that the Office of Equity is leading. And leading, I'm doing my air quotes with, because we are truly working alongside our colleagues so that this work is not siloed. So the work is being led by all the chiefs in our school districts. And then I want to highlight a few areas where we're highlighting specific aspects of the Educational Equity Policy 0101 that our school district has received lots of awards and accolades for. Some key takeaways, and I won't want to read what's on the slide to you, but for those of you who are watching from home, we have this beautiful educational equity policy in Prince George's County. It is 7 o'clock because I have my time go off every hour on the hour. And it has effective aspects, and then it has some expected impact. And what I love about this policy is that it explicitly names things that we have to confront and address in order to become a more equitable and inclusive Prince George's County Public Schools. It talks about deficit thinking and what that means when just because a person is Black or maybe overweight and dark skinned and an English language learner, that sometimes we climb the ladder of inference and we have low expectations for what we think that person can achieve. And as board member Adam Stafford said, we have to turn the mirror on ourselves, think about our own biases and the things that we bring to the table. But we first have to normalize the conversation so that we all understand that we're impacted by these implicit biases. And I'm proud of our school district for a lot of reasons. One that I'm extremely proud of is the fact that people have not been afraid to lean into those conversations. And when they did experience discomfort across the system, you can talk to lots of employees, people engaged, and had lots of ahas. There are certain key texts that are undergirding the work that we're doing to help prepare the system to begin doing deep, meaningful, and transformational work in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'll talk just about 2 of the books that you see here. Actually, I might talk about 3 of them. The first one is a book called This Book is Anti-Racist, and our CEO is just announcing, as of yesterday, our book study that is going to be on This Book is Anti-Racist, and it's 20 lessons for how to wake up, take action, and start the work. And we're going to thread lessons from this text throughout next school year, throughout our professional learning, so that more people know the vocabulary, so we can talk about inclusion, exclusion, calling in, calling out, creating welcoming environments, and some of the vocabulary that's attached to equity. Our principals this school year are going to read the book Unconscious Bias in Schools, which is specifically looking at teaching and learning and what leaders can do to help strengthen the instructional core, the relationship between students, teachers, and content, as we look at the biases that we bring to education and the hope and promise that we as teachers bring to education. And I'll talk a little bit more about the book in the center, Culture Responsive Teaching in the Brain, which is the guidebook. It is the guidebook for how the work gets done. And Dr. Judith White in the Division of Academics has been leading her entire division in what's now a 5-session book study where we are incorporating elements of culturally responsiveness into our curriculum. We are looking at who we are, what we're asking teachers to be aware of, and we're doing the adult work at the same time. And I get so excited I could talk ad nauseum about this, but I'll have to stop myself because we're limited on time. And I just talked a little bit about what was happening with the Division of Academics, and we're actually doing a PLC with the Zaretta Hammond herself, where about 12 teachers and 12 central office folks are in a pilot where we've been for several months delving deeply into these concepts. Teachers are trying out their learning to become more expert in what we mean when we say culturally responsive, because there's a science to it and there's an art to it and there's a connection to it. And we want to make sure that cultural responsiveness is not a buzzword, but it is something very technical and artful that we do to help improve teaching and learning. In the Division of School Leadership and Support, Dr. Helen Coley and her team we just had a beautiful professional learning from the Human Rights Campaign, Welcoming Schools, where we have created a new transgender and gender nonconforming students policy. And we have begun to think about what it means to create welcoming environments for all families, no matter the composition of the family, so that everyone feels welcome in schools. And we are centering the LGBTQ+ community. We had lots of principals and assistant principals look at data about mental health, suicide, being kicked out of the house, and feeling the opposite of affirmed, being rejected. And so when we look at the dropout data and the student achievement data, and we ask questions about who the students are who aren't meeting their maximum potential, it is often students who fall into these intersected identities who don't get the type of affirmation that they need. The work for restorative approaches is expanding under this division, and we've done lots of work to begin thinking about what we look at our Bridge to Excellence schools. So a walkthrough used to be, when I was in Prince George's County, we focused on instruction. We focused on what the teacher was doing and the content. We now hear people saying, what about the schools that are TSI? And if you are identified for English language learners, did we collect data about the English language learners? What do we know about whether they're 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 on listening, speaking, reading, writing, and how does that play out? So our conversations are becoming even more nuanced, which has implications for improvement. And last, I'll actually skip over talking about the work happening in my own division, but there's lots of book studies, lots of stuff that Dr. Holden is doing with summer leadership, and her team have been doing lots of professional development throughout the year, where we are centering aspects of equity and cultural responsiveness. As I begin to wrap, there's a slide there that you can read through, but we've had some successes that have been, and I have high expectations for our school district. But the successes have been bigger than I can imagine. Board member Jackson, I was invited to meet with 2 different student groups that she was a part of, and our students are so bright, they're so sharp, and they advocate so hard for their peers. And it's been amazing to hear them talk about what they want me to do to help their school district get better. And there's an eager appetite for improving PGCPS. Where people are naming and confronting things like I hadn't heard before. But what I learned was that when the space is created by the CEO to engage in the dialogue, people walk into that expectation and begin engaging. And we're just at the beginning, and I can only imagine the richness of the rewards that we're going to get 5 years from now. And on the challenging side, one thing I want to point to is that cultural shifts are not always measurable. When we talk about like how you feel when you feel like you belong, sometimes it's difficult to quantify that. And when we think about success, there are all of these micro stories that are a piece of that success story. And the other thing I want to point to is that this work, once you start bringing up aspects of your identity, of your pain, and allowing your students to do the same and your colleagues, there's the opportunity to reconcile, to be better understood, to feel like you're a part of something which is motivating, and the work takes an emotional toll. And so it's going to take support for us to figure out what to do when some of the issues come to the fore that we have to confront. The work is adaptive, it's hard, there aren't cookie cutter answers, but that is a challenge that we will have to look forward to. Last, how can the board support? And this slide I thought about long and hard around how bold I would be. And here's what I came up with. I want our Board of Education to engage directly in the work as a school board that aligns with our equity policy. I would love for you all to do the circles of my multicultural self-activity as a start with each other if you haven't. And I know you all advocate really, really hard. And as you're advocating, be in the work at the same time for yourself and reflect on your own biases and assumptions. Because it's important that our leadership at the school board level and at the executive level and at the school leader level model that we can disagree productively. And through that disagreement, when it's managed well, we can be really creative and resourceful, and it allows us to be inclusive of divergent ideas, and that makes us stronger. And last, maintain a learning, collaborative orientation as we advocate for students and families who have been most marginalized. I particularly appreciate the warmth of this committee, the laughter that we had together before the cameras rolled, because it creates a space where I don't feel like I'm presenting to the bosses of my CEO, the bosses of my boss's boss, right? I feel like I'm in a collaborative learning space where we can figure something out together, and that's what our purpose is. So those are 3 things that the Board of Education can do to support. And if there are questions that you have about anything that you saw, go for it. I'll try to stop my screen share so we can see each other's faces better.
Awesome. Board Member Jackson?
Yep. So good evening, everyone. Sorry for my late appearance and arrival. I guess first I want to start out with just saying, Mr. Reese, you know how much I love you and your team and the work that you're doing here in PGCPS. And truly and genuinely, it's the work like this that makes me probably the most proud to be a PGCPS student. You remarked and alluded to some of the meetings you had with a few student groups. And I can do nothing except emphasize and echo your sentiments about students, particularly, being hungry for change and wanting to be involved in that process of getting us to this place where we should be. With that being said, I only have one question at the moment, and I might have missed it, so I apologize if I did. But I was wondering if you can kind of talk to us about our strategic plan and where that is in its current progress and current state. I know at the beginning of my term, we had a meeting with yourself and a few of your other colleagues, and we kind of started the conversation around equity and where that fits in within PGCPS's mission and vision.
So what's so awesome is because there's so much to talk about in the work that was one of the things that I did not mention a whole lot about. But we definitely when Dr. Thornton was still the board chair, we engaged the Board of Education in some conversations around the upcoming strategic planning process, got lots of comments around mission and vision and what that might look like. And it's so interesting that Doug Strader is here on this call because we worked in collaboration as human resources and accountability to lead the charge with the data collection, the analysis process that involved lots of community members from Prince George's County to create this thing that we call the emerging strategic framework, that we had these open mic sessions. Well, once we produced it from the voices of the system, we had lots of people come to one of 44 sessions where all you had to do was come and share your thoughts and ideas around, does this work? What should we measure? What gets you excited? What didn't we get right? And that has helped us refine the framework as we begin to put measurable goals in place. And we actually have a conversation tomorrow with our partner Hanover Research to talk about what those KPIs, key performance indicators, which we're calling something else, will look like that will help drive the equity-focused goals that we're going to have for our district. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. Now, this is a topic I could talk about till 10 o'clock at night. This is the work I do every day. So I'm going to request that Dr. White and Mr. Reese and I, we connect outside of this, but, I'm so, thrilled and happy to hear about all the awesome work that our district is doing around this work, and specifically giving educators and school leaders the space to really analyze their own biases and how they show up in the classroom. So, my questions are just around how do we scale this in terms of transfer to practice? So, what I talk to districts about is moving beyond the book study, right? The book study, got it. We got the content down, right? Now we need to move beyond the book study to change in hearts and minds within the classroom, to really exhibit this anti-racist attitude and policy in a real tangible form. So that's the first question. What's our plan for scaling and moving beyond, from theory to practice? And then also, just thinking about, equity-centered design, right? So as you all are coming up with, these KPIs and thinking really deeply about the work from the information gathering you've done, the concept of, equity-centered design, I don't have to tell everyone here, is that you really design for the margin, right? You design for those that are least able to access what we have to offer. And so how have those voices been brought to the center of what the equity initiatives and policies have been? And are there plans to pull together focus groups, stakeholder surveys around people that really are really the furthest from opportunity within our district? And then, of course, we have to talk after this because you were in Durham at the same time I was. Down the street, I was at Hillside New Tech. So we definitely have to talk.
Hillside New Tech. Okay, and I started off at Jordan High School. We have a lot to discuss.
I was at Jordan too. There we go.
Jordan, North Carolina. Awesome. So let me see if I think I tried to capture your questions in which is now my messy handwriting. I'm more like a physician than a teacher with my handwriting. But I'll give you a quick story around how you scale and actually get the work into practice. And I'm actually going to talk about some work that happened with the Division of Academics, where there was a group of us who've been leading this professional learning around culturally responsive teaching in the brain. And there's a team of about 7 people who Dr. White selected to lead the work. And she graciously said, David, do your thing, have at it with them. I'm going to check in. We're going to talk about it, but I want you to work with them and build their capacity. Well, one of the debrief participants on the leadership team of that group, she said, during our first session, 75% of the people who spoke out were white women. But white women are not 75% of the people who are working here.
Yeah.
And we have a conversation about what we did to create that space. And so we, as a leadership team leading the work, had to be in the work of how is privilege playing out, how is power playing out. We as teachers, who are we inviting and disinviting? And it was that simple data point that made us go back to our own drawing board as the culturally responsive people to figure out what we might have missed and what we permitted. So because we had that hard dialogue across difference with each other, we know what it feels like when we invite teachers and principals and other people to do the same thing. So I think you scale the work by actually truly being in the work, that's my ask of the board, to be in the work so we know what it is that we're asking people to experience. And the other thing I want to give kudos to is the fact that the office, and this is not a plug for more positions, but the Office of Equity and Excellence is pretty small, which forces the fact that the work cannot be siloed, which means I have to work with Doug Strader and his division. I have to work with Veronica Harrison, and I have to work with Kia McDaniel and academics, because we all have to do the work together. And if it doesn't start siloed, it can't remain siloed. So that's my answer to that. Equity-centered design. There's so much I could talk about regarding that. So when we've been listening to people at the open mics, it's been amazing to see who has shown up. Sometimes it's people who have what we might refer to as an I don't believe in this, but people talk about low status positions in a school district. When they don't have to think about their supervisor or supervisor, when you say anyone can come, people showed up and they spoke their truth and they gave their ideas. And so I was writing their names down. So when it's time to have people lead to do something later on, those are the people who we're going to tap because they showed up, and they can help us create opportunities for more of their peers to have voice and agency. So it takes intentional searching and intentional centering, and literally taking data around the fact that we don't have any. Last year, we had 0 Asian Americans who were on the leadership team for the CEO book study. This year, we have like 2 of the 6 are from the Asian American community. So it's about looking to see what we're missing and actually doing something to fix it, and then telling people that that's what we did. And I wrote down Durham because I was taking notes, but that was not your third question. There was a third question you had, but I missed it.
Got it. No, I think I only had 2 because I could literally talk about this all night, and I don't want to be, do that again. Here goes Miss Jackson, and then we'll wrap up here.
Yeah, thank you. You said your office is pretty small, Mr. Reese. Just to throw it out there, graduating senior, be going to college soon. If you need some help, I got you. But aside from that, I had 2 questions.
Actually, I'll reach out. Yes. I have something for you to do. We'll talk about that offline with the CEO book study involving students in the conversation.
Ask not, you have not. That's right.
Cool. All right. Yeah. Okay. So I have 2 questions. One of them being that you said that cultural shifts aren't always measurable. Sometimes there is no hard numbers or data or statistics we can look to see or to examine the progress that's being made when we talk about some of these ideas and practices. So with that being said, my first question is, with that in mind, how do we know as a school system that change is actually occurring? So whether it's on, like, for example, I guess like the school-based level, how do we know that educators and school leaders, my principal, my assistant principal, my teachers are employing the practices in internalizing kind of these social theories that, are being, that they're being supplied with. So yeah, so how, like, what are some indicators, I guess, for example, me as a student, I would look out for? What are some things that I would maybe start to notice if things are changing? And what does that shift look like, would be my first question.
Okay, I'll give a quick response to that first question, because I said that these cultural shifts are difficult or hard to manage, not impossible. So one, for instance, like what if, for example, we surveyed students to say on a Likert scale, or how many times, or how many of your teachers and other adults in the building have affirmed some aspect of your identity that's important to you. And what if we knew that because we care about identity and students feeling like they belong, and that the adults who are charged with caring for and teaching them were doing that work of affirmation? Like what if principals knew that that is a metric that we actually wanted to see get better? What would a principal do to encourage staff members to understand different types of identities, to encourage students to be who they are, as Board Member Valentine said, and to show up with your whole self? So we could look at that type of data over time to see how students are talking about their experiences. And that's the most valid data, that is just my own bias, is the data that comes from students. So that's one way how we might begin to capture how much the work is being entrenched and internalized.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is, I know that a few individuals, one of the ways that they think is effective in kind of transmitting this understanding of intersectionality and checking your biases and showing up with your whole self and understanding the more theoretical side of it is professional development, right? We need a PD course for this, we need a PD course for that, we need a PD course on cultural responsiveness, and I know your office in the district is working on that. But I guess one of my first questions would be is what role do you believe PD has in this case? What role do you believe professional developments have when it comes to ensuring that there is this understanding by faculty and staff members of what we want them to understand with this idea? And then aside from professional developments, are there either more effective ways on their own or more effective ways in combination with PDs to ensure that, again, this idea is being understood and internalized and all that good stuff?
That's a brilliant question. Thank you for asking it. And it really is brilliant because when people think about professional development or professional learning, many of us think about the hour-long session, the weekend retreat, or the PowerPoint slides that David Reese might show you. And that is a piece of the professional learning. And when the professional learning is actually job embedded, when supervisors and managers actually create time and space on a regular basis during team meetings that might happen weekly to reflect on the impact of the circles activity, or the impact of what happened when we had all of these principles affirming LGBTQ members, like what was the next step with that? It's the ongoing consistency and follow through that helps people reflect on their practice. And then there's a lot of research on reflective practice. So small things like little check-ins around how did that go for you? Or I used to think, but now I think. Or a supervisor saying in the moment, Dr. White, I noticed that you did X connected to our learning. Great job, if that's the way a person likes to be affirmed. All of that is a part of the ongoing cycle of professional learning. So we have to think more expansively around what that means. I know we have a lot of people in Prince George's County right now who we can say preaching to the choir. That's one of the colloquials that we use. Like people know and understand that and have a lot of experience with it.
The other thing I would say, even like with academics, you have to make sure I slow walked it. Like I knew that wasn't, when we were going through Zarita Hammond's book, that's not something, and I have the melting pot in my division, right? So it's a lot of different cultures. And before you got to be comfortable with who you are and what you bring to the table, right? And how do you manage yourself? And so this has been like every other month we get together, and this team gets together constantly. They send things to me, we review it. But I think the biggest thing about professional development is you set the tone and you set a purpose. And you have to say, So in a year from now, I already knew in a year from now, what do I want? In a year from now, it wasn't adjusting curriculum. In a year from now, it was having my own staff who impacts teachers that have a better perspective of who they are. So they're inviting to who they serve. Right. And so you have to use professional development to have a hook. I think when Dr. Goldson first did her book study last year, she opened that up to anyone. That wasn't about if you were on her executive leadership team or if you were a principal, like anybody in the district who wanted to be a part of that movement at work. And she's going to be doing that again this summer. So I think we have to not look at professional development sometimes like, oh, let's get everybody done and we're going to train and we're going to think magic happens. The other thing I would say definitely in the anniversary of everything that happened with George Floyd, it was such an opportunity for us to have student voice. It was such an opportunity for us to begin to give teachers toolkits to have very uncomfortable conversations down to our youngest learners in the classroom and to give them a guide to follow. So you might not be comfortable, but we're going to give everybody a guide to start, and we're going to give this toolkit of how to have, and that hasn't been the only uncomfortable thing that's happened. Then we had the Capitol happen. And boom, right again, now people are more used to that toolkit. They know a better way to come in. And we were able to create different resources for staff to use to become comfortable, because sometimes you have to push through being uncomfortable to allow everyone to have a voice. And that in itself is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So it's not something that it changes overnight. It's how do we begin to say that this is an uncomfortable thing? And every voice can be heard and every voice has value. And that's going to take time to see that in our district as large as we are.
Comfort in the discomfort. Well, I am like so excited, and just this is such a great way for us to end our meeting, on unfortunately this anniversary of this racial reckoning that happened in our country, but to be encouraged by the great work that our school system is doing to move the needle forward. And I just want to encourage this team to really think through, okay, how can we develop our own PGCPS surveys, models, frameworks around cultural affirmation? Because the thing is, we are doing it well here. If you look nationally, everyone is trying to figure out how to motivate and push students of color specifically to be high achieving across the board. And that's happening here. And so I really think that cultural responsive teaching is the broth that it's all cooked in. It's not like a checklist, right? It's a change in the mindset. And so the fact that we're spending that time with staff to really dig down deep into that just says a lot to the commitment here in the district. And so, like I said, I could talk about this forever, but we are going to keep going. And I'm just so grateful for that presentation. Any follow-ups from the committee will be posted on board docs. And I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out for such a great meeting. And I wanted to see if I could have a motion to adjourn the meeting.
One quick thing before you get your motion.
Yeah.
Mr. Reese, can I get you to email me your presentation, please?
Absolutely. I'll share it with you right now.
Thank you. All right, adjourn. Go ahead.
All right, great. So can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Okay, all in favor?
You need a second?
Oh, wait, a second. I need a second.
Second.
Second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, aye. So we're adjourned. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Mr. Reese, I had to ask you a quick question.
Thank you.
You'll
Now,
still, you ask him here,
Will.
you'll still be on the recording.
Could we stop the recording possible or pause it?
Do you want to stop the cloud recording?